At the most isolated edges of the town of Herald, there is the Welcome Inn, an old structure that welcomes guests from all over. They do have one major rule: don't let any guests in or out after dark. I checked the chart as I went over the task to see if there was anything that I forgot. The windows were locked, the side and back doors were locked. The guests were either in the rooms or they were in the dining hall. The curtains were all drawn. The last step is locking the front doors of the inn. I peer outside. The sun is setting and shadows are getting long. Inside of the shadows, I could see humanoid shapes that look almost solid. If I didn't know better, I would think that they were guests. But I know better now. I subconsciously rub a triangular scar on the back of my arm as I step outside, and I set out the distractions for our nightly guests. I set out several pairs of mismatched boots, that way the guests could try, and fail, to find a matching pair. The trick is to make them close in style and size, just a little off, so that way they believe there is a matched pair if they can just find it. I stay within the waning sunlight as I set out the boots. Then I also grab a sack of birdseed as I begin to pour it around the inn. Planted around the inn are thorny rose bushes that bloom year-round. I am careful to not let too much of the seed fall beneath the roses, but I leave a line of the seed around the inn, circling the entire inn with the birdseed. When I reach the front door, the shadows are longer still, and the figures are even closer. Even seeing this every day, my heart races a bit, seeing them get closer and closer. I know logically that I am safe as long as the sun is still above the horizon. I know that the seeds, boots, and roses protect me. But still, it's frightening to see them so close and waiting in the shadows. They look like people, but at the same time, they're anything but people. Their gray eyes has no spark behind it. Despite the cold mountain air, their breath isn't visible like mine. Their skin is bruised deeply purple and green. Their smiles are wide, too wide. Their teeth are too sharp. In the fading light of the day, it's clear that they are Upyrs and not human. At night, however, I close the front door, I lock it, and I shut the curtain. In truth, the locks are only for my own mental benefit. If they are welcomed into the inn, they could tear the doors and walls down with ease. But as long as they don't have permission to enter, they cannot enter. Not even if the doors and windows are open. But we know from experience that guests tend to invite them in without realizing what they're doing. It's also why we keep the rose bushes around the inn. Keeps them from getting close to the guests' rooms. Forces them to focus on the doors that are in the employees' only areas. Whispering, threatening, promising, saying whatever they think will get them inside of the inn. Keeping the curtains closed means that they cannot see us, and they don't know if they are speaking to an empty room or to an employee. So they keep trying, and as long as we remain silent, they get bored and they move on. And that is why I set out the birdseed and the boots. They're chores and tasks for the Upyrs to keep themselves distracted. They keep trying on the boots. They keep trying to find the matching pair, and they also count the bird seed, a count that keeps changing because the night birds keep sneaking some of the seed away. So the Upyrs keep counting and recounting, trying to find the correct number that keeps changing. We change the chores sometimes. In autumn, we leave out rakes and they pile the leaves into neat piles for us. During snowfall, we leave shovels out and they shovel our walkways through. But the important part is trying to keep the Upyrs from getting bored. We learn that they don't like to read nor listen to music, but surprisingly love coloring, counting, and organizing. As long as all of these precautions are kept, the Welcome Inn is kept safe from the Upyrs, and all of our guests are kept safe as well. With my chores done, I made it up to the attic, where my grandfather was resting. The attic was a comfortable space with a fireplace on the far end, and my grandfather sat in a rocking chair, looking into the fire, just stuck in his thoughts, while I sat next to him. At this point of his life, he spent more time looking to the past than he did the present or the future. Still, he stirred when I sat next to him. He glanced my way, then went back to staring at the fire. "The welcome in is prepared. The guests are safe," he said to no one in particular. When I heard his words, I hesitated. I turned to face him, and he turned back to me. "Can you repeat what you said?" I asked him, and he smiled toothlessly. "The welcome in is prepared. The guests are safe," my grandfather said as I grabbed up my knife. Normally he said, "The welcome in is prepared. The guests are safe. The staff are safe." When he left off the last part, that wasn't forgetfulness. It was a warning. My knife in hand, I turned back to the door, leading down as I turned back to my grandfather. "Don't welcome anyone inside of here. I'll be back," I told him as he nodded. "I won't invite anyone inside, and you will be back," he said. The tone made it clear it was a warning as well. Hopefully one that I understood properly. I quickly went downstairs and I checked the doors to the guest rooms. Sure enough, they all had their do not disturb signs up, making it clear that no one was allowed inside. The theory we had was that each room counted as a separate space, but we never had a chance to test this theory. Not until tonight. But the guest rooms were locked up, then I made it downstairs to the dining hall. It was close enough to the kitchen that we could get food and drink. Usually, the staff would be drinking, joking, and chatting at this hour. When I got down to the dining room, what I saw instead cemented how fucked we really were. The dining room was empty, every plate carefully arranged, not a scrap of food, not a drop of drink, not a single item out of place. The door to the kitchen was still open, and the kitchen door was open. No workers were visible, just an open door leading into the darkness. Out in the darkness, I could only see the eyes that had no spark to them. I quietly closed the door, but I knew that if any of the Upyrs got inside, then it would not help. Even glancing around the kitchen, I couldn't see any. The kitchen was also made immaculate, so not only did they have time to organize it, they had been in the inn for a while. Only one other place that they could be. I made my way upstairs, and to my horror, everything was organized and straightened to a supernatural degree. The books on the tables were at perfect right angles. Every picture straightened as I made my way up to the kitchen, silently cursing myself for having the inn so well organized, giving the Upyrs less to organize as I finally made it to the attic, and I opened it. Sure enough, behind the door I could see 3 tall, shadowy figures, surrounded by dozens of more or translucent figures. Dead eyes staring back at me. One of the Upyrs held a knife to my grandfather's neck. The tallest figure, a man in a bright red raincoat and with shades over his eyes. I don't know how he managed to sneak into the inn, but judging by the way the other Upyrs bowed their heads a little to him, told me that they saw the man in red either as a leader or they owed him a debt. Upyrs almost never worked together. They were solitary hunters. Even when in a group, it would take a lot of power, or they would have to owe a lot of debt to defer to anyone else, rather than just tearing my grandfather apart. Instead, I stood up straight as I pointed my knife at the figure in red. "Stop! I offer a challenge to you," I said as he paused and looked up at me, his eyes still hidden behind his reflective sunglasses. "A challenge?" he asked as I kept my knife pointed at him. It was important that I didn't show any hesitation. It was important that I didn't show any weakness. If they thought the challenge wasn't genuine, they would owe me nothing. But if they thought it was genuine, then that could be entertainment for them. Something wagered, something that they can gain, and something that they can lose. A story that they can tell and retell. The only thing they desired more than blood was life, and a challenge would certainly give them life. Combat, blade to blade, hand to hand. If I leave 3 marks on you, you and your compatriots leave this inn and never return. If you leave 3 marks on me, then you can take me into the darkness, I said, the words familiar on my tongue, as the Upyr in red glanced down at my grandfather. "It isn't you I want, it's him. If I win, I take him," he said, poking my grandfather's throat with a knife, drawing a drop of blood to the surface of the skin. Before I could answer, my grandfather spoke up. "I agree on my own behalf. If my grandchild is to lose, then you may take me to the darkness. But if they win, both you and all you've welcomed into my home will never be welcomed back," my grandfather said, and the Upyr glanced back my way. "Is this agreeable to you?" he asked as he looked back at my grandfather, my eyes begging him not to wager his own life. But I saw in his eyes that he believed I would win. No, not believed. That wasn't the right words. In his eyes, he already saw my victory, and I knew that I had to believe in him. If he saw a victory, then there was a victory. It would just be my responsibility to get there. "I accept. 3 marks, I said, lifting my arm and glancing at the triangular scar on my arm. The remnants of a challenge I took long before. A challenge that took my mother and father away. Still, I kept my knife pointed up as the Upyr stalked towards me. I moved quickly, the entire process done in a few seconds. I feigned a stab towards his eyes as he dodged his head back, my knife striking forward, leaving a cut on his hand, another cut on his chest, and then finally a cut on his head, where his hair met his face. He lifted a hand up to his head, and he pulled it back, revealing crimson on his fingers. He must have been recently dead if he still bled. "That's it," he said, glancing down at his hand and chest, both also oozing blood. The wounds not deep, but the marks were clear to everyone in the room. He must have been expecting a longer fight, maybe with a lot of back and forth fighting, stabs, parries, and slashes at each other, going back and forth trying to find a weakness in each other. A dramatic picture, certainly, and years ago I thought that was how a knife fight with an Upyr should go. What I learned in that fight is it didn't matter what was going on in your head. You strike quickly, and you had to be quicker than your enemy. Last time, the Upyr defeated me in seconds, and I lost my parents because of it. Another wager made, a wager lost. Ever since then, I practiced, and I practiced, until I was certain I was faster than any Upyr. Then, I kept practicing. "You have been bested. Now leave the inn," I said, my knife pointed towards the man in red. He kept staring at me like he didn't understand what he said. Then, it was like he snapped out of it as he stepped back, his knife again at my grandfather's throat. "Well, you can't make me. I can kill him before you get to me," he said as he tried to push the knife into my grandfather's throat, only to find that he couldn't. He pushed as hard as he could, but the knife couldn't get closer. His hand, his elbow, and his arm couldn't move. My grandfather grabbed a cup of tea as he sipped at it, and he tiredly glanced up at the man in the red raincoat. What kind of arrogance possesses you? You believe that lying makes you clever? You believe that murdering an old man will make you strong? You believe that being the first inside makes you a leader? He said as more and more arms became visible. Ghostly figures held the man in red back, holding his wrist, his hand, his elbow, his head, and his chest. Countless unseen Upyrs now made visible, and clearly holding him back. "Wait, let me kill him! It'll be so easy!" he said to the Upyrs, who no longer cast their dead eyes down, but stared at the man in red. A leader no longer. Now their newest meal. As they pulled him down the hallway, he grabbed at the doorway, his glasses falling, revealing terrified eyes. Terrified, living eyes of a terrified, living man. But they still pulled him back and down, further and further, some Upyrs following and straightening up anything that the man moved or messed up. Even after all of that, the Upyrs still loved having everything in its place. The man's screams echoed through the inn. I mentally made a note to offer a refund to anyone who heard it, but otherwise I only watched as he was dragged down the stairs, his nails scraping across the floor, leaving blood and fingernails behind that were quickly scrubbed up. His screams continued into the kitchen as the exit door opened, and he was dragged outside. When he was pulled into the darkness, his screaming stopped suddenly, mid-scream. Outside, I could hear the sound of wet munching, slurping, and sucking, like a group of children tearing into messy pasta. I closed the kitchen door, making a mental note that we would need to rehire new staff. The others clearly given the heads up to leave to avoid the slaughter. Even if they didn't help the man in red, they didn't try to stop him, nor try to warn us either. When I made my way back to grandfather, he simply said, "The welcome inn is prepared. The guests are safe. We are both safe," he said as I sipped on my tea and watched the fire begin to die down.